Welcome back to Hold Fast, where we have biblical truths for daily battles. My name is Kenny. I am the host of the podcast, and you may or may not know this, but I also am a part of another podcast, and I think I mentioned it once or twice on this before, but shameless plug for the other podcast that I am a part of with my fellow elder, Nate O'Brien. The podcast is called Calford Catechism, and I'll put a link to that podcast in the show notes in case you're interested. We actually take a deeper dive into some theological issues, cultural issues. This podcast is usually somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes per episode, but that one is more so about an hour per episode. And we do a few shorter 15-minute, we call them leftover episodes every now and then. But if you're interested in another podcast, go ahead and check that one out, and I would appreciate you doing that. So today, as I record this, it is Tuesday, October 8th, and we are here in Florida bracing ourselves for the arrival of Hurricane Milton. So I thought, what more appropriate subject to talk about than how to face storms? And obviously, literally, how do we face actual hurricanes and natural disasters and these storms that approach us, and how do we think about them and deal with them? But the truths, hopefully, that we're going to discuss in this really are going to apply to just the storms of life in general, the difficult trials that come into our lives. And this is a subject we've talked about many times before, but I want to approach it from some words from Psalm chapter 62 that I think really help us, especially as we think about something like a major hurricane or a major life circumstance that we just feel completely helpless over. How do we face that? How do we deal with that? And then when we find ourselves on the other side of that storm and dealing with the destruction that it's caused, or dealing with the pain that that circumstance in our lives has brought, and the destruction in our lives has brought, how do we deal with it then? What do we do? How do we really hope in the Lord in situations like that? So let's read from Psalm chapter 62. I'm going to focus on verses 5 through 8 because I think this really gives us some great principles to hold on to in times like this. So verse 5 says, "For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is from him." Let's talk about that. We're going to kind of go through this verse by verse. For God alone, my soul will wait in silence. That's where your hope is. Your hope and peace in times of chaos, even in times where you just feel like you're completely out of control of the situation, your only hope is in the Lord. And it really is times like a hurricane that we realize this, that we are reminded of just how ultimately helpless we are to alter the circumstances of our life. We stare down the face of certain storms that come, and we realize that we have zero control over that. And there's just nothing we can do except to hope in the Lord. And a lot of times that's exactly the place that he's trying to get, to wait on him alone. But I love that phrase, "Oh, my soul, wait in silence." What does it mean to wait on the Lord? It doesn't mean we just sit back and not do anything and hope it all works out, right? I mean, when a hurricane comes, you make preparations. When you know that a difficult life circumstance is about to come, a lot of times we don't know, but when you do know that it's coming, you prepare for it. You apply godly wisdom to the situation, and you make sure that you do the things that you should do. So waiting on the Lord doesn't mean inaction. Waiting on the Lord means, I'm going to do those things that I'm called to do. And in the meantime, I'm going to wait on your will to come to fruition. I'm going to wait and trust that your plan is better. I'm not going to drive myself crazy in my anxious thoughts. I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to throw in the towel. I'm going to wait because I know that your ways are always better and higher than mine. I know that even when you allow suffering and disaster to come into my life, that you're not done yet, that I can wait on you, and I can wait in silence, meaning I'm not going to try to tell you how to do your job. I'm not going to, Lord, I'm going to pray to you, and I'm going to beg you for mercy. I'm going to beg you for help in this circumstance, but I'm not going to suggest that I know what should happen here. I'm not going to presume upon your kindness. I'm not going to presume upon your sovereignty and your wisdom in all of your ways. I'm going to wait in silence for you because my hope is from you. Verse 6, he only is my rock and my salvation. He is our rock, the foundation that we stand on, and he is our salvation. Let's remember that no matter what comes in this life, he's already given us the greatest gift he could ever give us in salvation through Jesus Christ. He's my fortress. I shall not be shaken. Now, you may hear a quote like that and you go, I've been shaken in my life before. And yes, in a sense, we do. There are things that come that shake us to our core, that even cause us, our faith to be shaken in certain ways. But ultimately speaking, you will remain in Christ. Ultimately speaking, you won't lose your salvation. You won't lose your hope in him. You will not be shaken, ultimately speaking. And I think that also we need to remember that for those of us who hope in the Lord in this way, when we say, you know what, I don't understand this situation. It's beyond what I can comprehend. It's beyond my control. It's something that if I were in charge, I wouldn't allow this to happen, right? I don't fully understand what the Lord's doing here, but I'm placing my hope firmly in him. I'm going to say that I'm not going to hope in the right outcomes. I'm not going to hope in the circumstances to go the way I want them to. I'm going to hope in the Lord. When you have that kind of hope truly firmly set on the Lord, your faith won't be shaken because you have a confidence in the Lord and his will and his sovereignty and his kindness and his goodness towards you. So he's our fortress. And when he's our fortress, when we trust in him in this way, we will not be shaken. I think about hurricanes and natural disasters. I think about right now the people in North Carolina, for example, that are still, many of them are still missing even as I record this, and people are just picking up the shambles of their lives. And I can imagine them looking out at the destruction, the devastation, and mourning that and grieving that and being broken over that. But those who are placing their hope in Christ, though their lives are shaken in many ways, their soul rests firmly in the Lord, even in the midst of unimaginable pain and disaster. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying that it takes the pain away. I'm saying it sets our souls firmly on the foundation of Jesus Christ, and that's what we ultimately need. He's my fortress, I won't be shaken. On God, verse 7 says, on God rests my salvation and my glory. My mighty rock, my refuge is God. It's just over and over again in this and many of the other Psalms. We have this language of who God is. He's my salvation. He's my glory. He's my rock. He's my refuge. He's my fortress. You have to keep reminding yourself of this over and over and over again, because the fear creeps in, the anxious thoughts creep in. The pain and the heartbreak come and they come in waves and they come in unexpected times. And we need to make sure that our feet are planted firmly in Christ and our hope in him. And verse 8 says, trust in him at all times, O people. That's a simple phrase, but it's times like this that it really hits, right? You go, trust in him at all times, even as the forecast says that in just a few hours, really, we're going to be dealing with some devastation unless the Lord intervenes. And here's another piece of this, by the way. I don't want to communicate that what we're supposed to do in times like this, when a storm is coming, or in times in our lives when certain circumstances are on their way and hard times are coming. I'm not suggesting that we just kind of sit back and just bear it. No, we should actually pray for the Lord to intervene. We can pray for him to literally turn the storm away, that it would fizzle out, and trust him completely that he can do that. But our trust has to go beyond just his ability to deliver us and his ability to turn the storm. Absolutely, he can do that. We should have great faith in his ability to do that and pray in faith that he would do that. But our faith has to go beyond and say, but even if not, my hope won't be shaken in you. I will still hope firmly in you. At all times, I will trust in you. Because the very next phrase in verse 8 says, pour out your heart before him. Let him know how you're feeling. That's important at a time like this. I follow pretty closely, whenever a storm comes, a guy by the name of Dennis Phillips. He's a meteorologist. I think he's from the Tampa area, maybe. But a lot of people follow him, and one of the reasons people like him is because he gives you the facts of the situation, and he has a rule that I think he calls rule number 7, and it's don't freak out. Right? This is not a time for panic. It's a time to work and to prepare and to get things done. And I'm with him 100% on that, right? We need to make sure that we don't just lose ourselves in the emotion of the situation so that we don't prepare and get ready and do the things we need to do. But if we're not careful, we can think that sometimes as Christians, we're supposed to be these people who literally never freak out, who never admit to feeling anxious and afraid and fearful and just overrun with all these emotions. We have to be willing to pour out our hearts before the Lord. He wants us to do that. He already knows what's in your heart, so he wants you to do that for him. And then remember that God is a refuge for us. He's a refuge for your soul. He's a refuge for you when your emotions and thoughts want to carry you all over the place. He is your hope and your stay, and he will hold you fast. So whatever the storm of life that's coming, whether it's literally a storm like many of us are facing, or whether it is a circumstance that's coming our way, let the words of Psalm 62 be an anchor for your soul. That you're going to wait on the Lord in silence. You're going to place your hope in him. You're going to set all of your faith on him as your rock and your salvation, and know that when you do that, you won't be shaken, because ultimately he has given us salvation, and one day he's going to make all things right again and all things new again. We have a hope that goes beyond the circumstances of this life. He's our mighty rock. He's our fortress. He's our refuge. So I can trust in him at all times, and I can be honest with him and pour out my heart before him. But all the while, I'm holding on to him as my refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble. There's an important phrase too, because certain things come into our life and it can feel like God is distant, and it can feel like he doesn't see, he doesn't care. But the Bible's clear that the Lord actually draws near to the brokenhearted. The Lord draws near to the one who's crushed in spirit. And so if that's you, the emotions that you're feeling, the pain that you're experiencing is not evidence that God is far off, but it's actually an opportunity for him to draw near to you as you put your faith and your trust and your hope in him. So I know that a podcast episode like this is by no means going to just calm every fear and anxiety that you have. But I know that Jesus does that. And I know that even at times when it doesn't make sense to have peace, we can have that peace that passes understanding. As long as we, as Philippians says, are not anxious about anything, but are praying about everything. By prayer and supplication, you're making your requests known to God. And as you do that, the peace of God that passes all understanding will guard your hearts and guard your minds in Christ Jesus. It will guard you from those anxious, even sinful thoughts. It will guard you from just constantly thinking worst case scenario and going into a mental spiral. The peace of Christ will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So I'm praying for all those who are in the path of the storm. I'm grateful to the Lord that it looks like, hopefully, and I'm praying for this, that Jacksonville specifically won't get hit too bad, but that does not mean that I am happy about that necessarily, because it means that other people are going to be affected. And it's a hard thing. It's a hard thing to process through all of this. And we want to ask why, Lord, do you allow these things? But my prayer for you is that even in all your questions and uncertainties, your certainty in the character of God would remain unshaken. That you know that he's always good, even when we don't understand his plan, even when we don't understand his ways, and that we would hope in him. And then as the storm passes, because we're not shaken, because our hope is in him, because we're able to pour out our hearts before him, as the storm passes, we are able to, with his help and his strength, pick up the pieces and help other people do the same as well. So praying for your safety. I'm praying for the Lord to turn the storm away. I believe absolutely he can do that. And whatever his will is, I'm praying for safety. I'm praying for unity of people to come together. And I'm praying that the Lord would, whatever happens in the situation, that the Lord would use it for his glory, and he would use it to draw people closer to himself. And I think we should all be praying for those things as Christians in times like this. Thanks for listening to this episode. And I know that it's very possible that I recorded this a little bit late, and nobody's going to be listening to this maybe until after the storm. So maybe it's an encouragement to you for any future circumstances that come your way, which is why I wanted to apply it not just to Hurricane Milton, but to literally just the hard times that come our way. Appreciate you all listening. We'd love it if you shared this with somebody. If it's helpful for you, give us a rating or review wherever you listen to the podcast. Subscribe to the podcast. It helps other people discover it as well. So, Lord willing, I'll be back next week with another episode. Hope you all stay safe and that the Lord keeps you through this storm. God bless.